Welcome to the debate. When you walk past a newly constructed building and you notice the facade is cracked, the bricks are misaligned, and the caulking is already peeling off the windows, you don't usually just think, wow, they hired a really bad painter.
Right, no, you immediately start questioning the bones beneath it.
Exactly.
You look at that and think, is the foundation sinking? Did they somehow compromise the structural steel? You look at a surface-level cosmetic flaw and make this intuitive leap to a fundamental structural failure.
Right, and in physical architecture, that intuition is universally accepted. I mean, nobody argues with that.
Yeah, of course not.
But when we transition from physical buildings to, say, the digital architecture of a multi-million-dollar defense contracting firm, suddenly that intuitive leap becomes highly contested.
Oh, very contested.
So today, we are immersing ourselves in the high-stakes defense and federal business quarter of Northern Virginia. We are talking specifically about Fairfax County, which is a region that pulls in an astonishing $40 billion a year in federal contracting.
It's massive.
Yeah. That is more federal procurement dollars than literally any other single locality in the United States.
And it is incredibly dense, too. I mean, you have massive integration firms and these highly specialized subcontractors operating in the immediate shadows of the Pentagon, the defense agencies, NASA, Dulles Airport.
Right.
And that sheer density and proximity, it breeds a very specific, unforgiving type of pressure.
Which brings us to our central question today. How do buyers in these zero margin for error environments evaluate operational risk?
Right.
Specifically, if you are a government procurement program lead or, a military acquisition team evaluating contractors, does a company's website accurately predict its internal operational discipline and execution success?
And we are drawing this debate from source material analyzing how digital clarity is actually perceived by buyers in these high-consequence aerospace and defense environments.
Yes, exactly. And I look at this landscape and I see a direct predictive signal. In these environments, a website is not just a marketing brochure. It is a vital operating signal.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
Hear me out. If a defense company's outward digital presence is confusing, cluttered, or just vague, a chief operating officer or a military buyer has to safely assume that the exact same confusion exists on the engineering floor.
Yeah, but
digital clarity proves to an evaluator that the business can organize complexity. A vague front end hides an unclear delivery structure. That's my stance.
okay, but I come at it from a very different way. While a confusing website is undoubtedly a nuisance for a buyer trying to find information, interpreting it as a direct one-to-one proxy for operational execution risk, that is a dangerous leap in logic.
Why is it dangerous?
Because it completely misunderstands how these complex firms are actually structured. I mean, we're talking about highly specialized systems engineering and cybersecurity firms here.
Right, which require discipline.
Yes, but conflating a simple messaging gap on a homepage with an inability to execute complex aerospace contracts, that misleads experienced program leaders. You are effectively asking a military buyer to substitute an aesthetic judgment for actual engineering reality.
Look, let's test that logic by looking at how businesses actually won and lost in this localized market. I want to start with the regional standard of Tyson's Corner in Vienna.
Okay, let's go to Tyson's.
If you are a buyer or a teaming partner in this specific ecosystem, you are never short on highly structured, deeply serious alternatives.
You have options.
Sure. So when a company in Tyson's relies on soft, generic language on their homepage, using empty phrases like mission-focused solutions without clearly defining their actual mechanical offer, I don't see that as a harmless design choice. I see it as a massive management clue.
But a clue to what, exactly? I mean, you are assuming that vague copy means the executives don't know what they're doing.
It means they can't agree on what they do. If a company cannot define its own offerings clearly on a homepage, it's like showing up to a military inspection in a disorganized uniform. It signals to an acquisition team that the internal delivery structure is just as fuzzy.
Okay, but have you considered who exactly is doing the buying in Tyson's Corner? We're talking about highly experienced program leaders, primes, and integrators.
Right.
These professionals are evaluating operational risk rapidly, yes, but they are doing so based on hard data. They are looking at facility security clearances, technical certifications, past performance.
But they have to find you first.
Sure, but they use the past performance information retrieval system. That's the actual government database of whether you succeeded or failed on previous contracts. They are not making a $100 million risk assessment based on whether your web copy is punchy.
Look, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Even highly experienced program leaders are human beings.
Well, most of them.
Right. And they have to synthesize massive amounts of complex information incredibly quickly. When they see generic buzzwords, they don't immediately dive into the past performance database to verify you. They just move on to the next vendor.
Sometimes. Maybe.
The real aha moment here is that a vague website creates an assumption vacuum. If your homepage just says you deliver mission-focused solutions, your sales team assumes you mean enterprise software.
Okay.
The military buyer assumes you mean physical hardware integration, and your poor engineers are left trying to build a bridge between two completely different realities.
I understand the danger of an assumption vacuum in a sales meeting, absolutely. But let's be realistic about why that vagueness exists online in the first place.
Why? Poor management?
No, OPSEC. If a defense company appears online as the sort of vague, undefined integrator, it is highly probable that their actual operations are heavily classified, deeply technical, or simply not a priority for the web development team.
So they just ignore their public face?
The vagueness might be a feature of their operational security, not a bug in their management structure. You are asking a COO to look at a marketing artifact and judge the engineering floor.
They're connected.
But an experienced operations leader knows that the entry-level copywriter drafting that mission-focused solutions paragraph is not the person staffing the highly sensitive satellite communication project.
Okay, that is a fair point about classified work. But clarity of positioning does not require spilling state secrets.
It doesn't, no.
You can demonstrate that you understand your lanes, your buyers, and your specific technical competencies without violating OPSEC. I mean, the entire Fairfax County market is built around trust, speed, readiness, and defensible execution.
Agreed.
If an executive buyer sees a vague, disorganized presentation of capabilities, they do not charitably assume, oh, they must be doing highly classified work. In a hyper-competitive market, taking the charitable view is a risk a prime contractor simply doesn't have the time to take.
So they just write them off.
They assume the executives haven't tightened their internal operating story. Period.
But that assumes the executives are the ones actually writing the website. I think you are assigning the blame to the wrong department entirely.
Well, we can't just talk about the promises companies make in the boardrooms of Tyson's Corner. We have to look at the plumbing.
Okay, let's look at the plumbing.
And that brings us logically to the operational hub of Herndon. Because if Tyson's is about positioning, Herndon is about mechanical execution.
Very true.
The regional value proposition of Herndon is efficiency, infrastructure, and responsiveness. And this is where the mechanics of a website actually mirror the mechanics of a business.
How so?
A website's navigation bar is basically an organizational wiring diagram. If a military buyer has to click through 3 dead links and a buried submenu just to find your basic security compliance data, it tells them your internal data silos are broken.
I'm sorry, I can't.
You are showing them the plumbing of your business, and it is visibly leaking. If you can't organize a menu, you can't organize a contract.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are asserting a deep structural causality where there is only a loose, superficial correlation.
It's not superficial.
It is. A buried proof point or a messy navigation bar is a failure of user interface design. Full stop. It is not a failure of systems engineering.
But it reflects.
Mechanically speaking, why should an operational leader view a web designer's poor layout choices as a predictor of sloppy internal business handoffs?
Because they allowed it to happen.
But if the UI designer puts the past performance PDF 3 clicks deep instead of on the homepage, how does that definitively prove that the project managers don't know how to transition a complex cybersecurity contract from business development to operations?
It proves it because a website is the ultimate public-facing output of a leadership team's consensus. Web designers don't publish in a vacuum.
They kind of do, sometimes.
No, A CEO, a COO, or a VP of strategy signs off on that navigation bar. If the leadership team tolerates a front-end experience that forces a visitor to hunt for basic information, it indicates that their internal tolerance for friction is far too high.
That is quite the leap.
Think about the scale of what we are dealing with here. If a leadership team cannot organize the relatively simple complexity of a 20-page marketing website, how can a federal buyer possibly trust them to organize the immense life-or-death complexity of a multi-year aerospace integration?
Wait, let me stop you right there. Do you genuinely believe the VP of Systems Engineering at a $500 million defense firm is proofreading the drop-down menus on the marketing site?
They should be reviewing the output, yes.
Because if they are, that is an operational red flag. Organizing complexity is entirely context-dependent. Organizing a digital interface requires an understanding of user psychology, digital customer journeys, conversion rate optimization.
Right, which are systems.
But organizing a defense contract requires an understanding of supply chain logistics, federal compliance matrices, and mechanical engineering. They are two entirely different skill sets.
They are, but
A firm out in Herndon might be incredibly responsive on a secure, encrypted comms channel with the auditors at the Defense Contract Management Agency. You know, the folks actually grading your operational delivery.
sure.
While simultaneously having an outdated, cluttered website. Why? Because their primary singular focus is mission delivery, not digital marketing.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. You are treating the website as a siloed entity, completely quarantined from the rest of the business.
Because functionally it often is.
But when you map out the anatomy of a failed defense contract, you realize that separation is a total illusion. Defense companies often mistakenly believe a weak website creates a marketing problem, just fewer leads.
Which it does.
Yes, but in reality, it creates a massive systemic operations problem. And this transitions us from theory to the actual mechanical sequence of internal project failure. We call it the downstream cascade.
Ah, the domino effect. Okay, walk me through the mechanics of how a bad website supposedly destroys a massive federal contract.
Let's trace it step by step. The cascade of preventable downstream friction always starts at the digital front door.
Okay.
Let's say your capability statement on the website is confusing and relies on those vague buzzwords we discussed. Because the offerings are poorly defined, your sales team ends up engaging with the wrong types of buyers.
Or they spend the whole cycle clarifying.
Exactly. They spend the entire sales cycle trying to untangle what the company actually does. That misaligned, highly customized sales process results in a sloppy internal handoff to the delivery teams.
Right.
The delivery teams get a statement of work that doesn't match their standardized operating procedures. That sloppy handoff directly causes scope drift because the mechanical requirements were misunderstood from the very beginning.
And scope drift is a nightmare, yes.
It results in missed delivery expectations. And finally, those missed expectations culminate in margin loss and massive customer frustration. This entire catastrophic operational cascade is exactly why military acquisition teams must view digital clarity as proof of internal alignment.
Look, I will certainly concede that bad fit sales cause scope drift, and scope drift destroys margins. That is just a universal truth in project management, whether you are building a bridge or deploying a zero-trust network.
So you agree?
I agree with that part, but I am not convinced by your line of reasoning because it gives far too much power to front-end marketing.
How so?
Tracing margin loss on a massive, highly regulated federal contract all the way back to the use of the phrase mission-focused solutions on a homepage is an incredible stretch.
Why is it a stretch? The cascade of internal friction has to start somewhere. That assumption vacuum begins the moment the buyer engages with the brand.
It is a stretch because it ignores the grueling reality of how complex federal procurement actually works. Scope drift and margin loss in defense contracting are almost entirely driven by changing mission requirements from the government itself.
Well, not always.
Or by macro supply chain disruptions, or by unforeseen technical hurdles in the engineering process. It is rarely because a buyer was confused by a website, booked a call, signed a contract, and then realized 9 months later they bought the wrong thing.
It happens more than you'd think.
Federal acquisitions take months, sometimes years. There are exhaustive requests for proposals, requests for information, massive compliance matrices that map every technical requirement to a specific engineering outcome,
Yes, the RFP gauntlet.
and rigorous oral presentations. The idea that a bad website navigation bar survives that 2-year procurement gauntlet and acts as the root cause of margin loss is frankly very difficult to accept.
I'm not saying the website is the only cause of margin loss. And I completely acknowledge that supply chains break and mission requirements shift. Those are external factors.
Huge external factors.
But what we're looking at is internal misalignment, which is entirely preventable. Let's look at the mechanics of that RFP process you just mentioned.
Sure.
Yes, there's a rigorous gauntlet. But if your baseline operating model is fuzzy, if your website can't even articulate what you do, your capture team doesn't have a clear, standardized boilerplate to draw from when they write that RFP response.
They usually build it custom anyway.
But they have to invent the core premise on the fly. The engineers review the proposal and contradict the capture team. The executives step in and add a third layer of confusion.
That sounds like a Tuesday in defense contracting.
Right, but the proposals end up being messy, disjointed patchworks precisely because the foundational digital positioning was never clarified. If the baseline is fuzzy, onboarding the new customer will be just as confusing as navigating the website.
But that implies that a company cannot be bad at marketing but genuinely excellent at execution, which contradicts decades of history in the defense industrial base.
It might have been true in the past.
Some of the most capable, technically brilliant engineering firms in the world have absolutely terrible 1990s-era websites. They win work because their engineering speaks for itself when it counts.
It is the baseline expectation. If you look like a generic, uncoordinated reseller online, a modern COO will naturally assume your internal operating model is just as uncoordinated.
I still say they look deeper than that.
But let's look at the inverse, the massive operational benefits of getting this right. A clear, hyper-specific website tells an operations leader that internal alignment actually exists.
Well, it tells them the marketing team is aligned.
It signals that the executives have done the hard work of defining their lanes. It signals that customer onboarding will likely be cleaner because the company knows exactly what it does and what it doesn't do. Above all, it makes the company look easier to trust.
Easier to trust is the operative phrase there, and I think it is the pivot point of our whole discussion.
Okay.
I will agree that digital clarity absolutely lubricates the initial stages of trust building. It drastically lowers the cognitive load on the evaluator.
Massive relief for them.
Oh, absolutely. If I'm an acquisition professional staring at 20 different cybersecurity vendors in Fairfax County, a clean, actionable, well-organized presentation of capabilities is a huge relief. But looking easier to trust is not the same thing as possessing structural engineering readiness.
It's a proxy for it.
I worry that if we adopt this framework too rigidly, we will end up with acquisition teams who prioritize polished web copy over substantive technical rigor. We risk optimizing for the facade rather than the foundation.
But the underlying theory here isn't that digital clarity replaces engineering rigor. It's that digital clarity directly reflects engineering rigor.
Does it, though?
Yes. The ability to present complex technical capabilities in an actionable, easily digestible way requires a deep, structural understanding of your own complexity. You literally cannot write clear, incisive capability statements if your internal delivery teams are misaligned. The clarity of the external output proves the discipline of the internal process.
Or it simply proves that you hired a very expensive, very talented digital agency in Tyson's Corner to write it for you.
Well, that still requires alignment to approve.
Look, I recognize the power of the signal. In a market moving as fast as this one, with billions of dollars on the line and massive cognitive overload, heuristics are necessary. COOs and military buyers use shortcuts to evaluate risk because they have to.
Exactly.
A messy website is a convenient heuristic for a messy business. I just urge deep caution in treating that heuristic as an infallible law of operations. Because the moment we equate a marketing asset with a systems engineering capability, we open the door to highly polished firms that can sell but cannot deliver.
That is a critical distinction, and honestly, a great place to begin summarizing our positions.
Sounds good.
From my perspective, looking at the dense reality of the Northern Virginia Defense Corridor, this ecosystem is built entirely on trust, speed, and readiness.
Yes.
In this hyper-competitive environment, digital clarity remains the most immediate, visible proxy we have for a firm's internal operational discipline. A confusing website is not just a harmless marketing gap or a quirky trait of a brilliant engineering firm. It is a predictive warning sign.
The cracked facade.
Right. It is the beginning of an assumption vacuum that leads directly to preventable downstream friction, sloppy handoffs, flawed RFP responses, and ultimately, margin loss. Clear digital positioning proves that a leadership team knows exactly how to organize complexity.
And my summary is that while digital clarity undeniably lowers the cognitive load for a buyer and makes a business look much easier to trust, true operational risk assessment for complex defense execution requires looking far deeper than a company's front-end marketing assets.
Which takes time.
It does, but it's required. A website is a wiring diagram of a company's marketing strategy, not its delivery capability. Conflating a web designer's interface choices with a systems engineer's execution capabilities is a dangerous game. It risks substituting aesthetic judgments for operational reality. And at high-consequence environments, the foundation always matters more than the paint job.
Yet, despite our different lenses, we do share a very significant point of convergence here.
We do.
We both agree that in the high-stakes Fairfax County ecosystem, preventable downstream friction is a massive systemic risk. We also agree that clear, precise communication between a contractor and a military acquisition team is absolutely essential to preventing scope drift.
Completely essential.
Regardless of whether that friction starts on the website homepage or rears its head 2 years later during an RFP oral presentation.
Absolutely. The downstream consequences are incredibly real, and managing the cost of those mistakes is the primary job of any operations leader in this space.
Right.
It is incredibly valuable to view these defense contractors through both of these lenses simultaneously. You know, the strategic marketing perspective that demands clear positioning to prevent an assumption vacuum.
And your operations perspective?
Exactly. The skeptical operations perspective that demands looking past the polish at the actual mechanics of delivery.
And we haven't even touched on how the massive cloud computing footprints out in Loudoun County and Sterling are changing this regional dynamic.
Oh, that's a whole different beast.
It is. It's forcing traditional aerospace players to adapt to a much faster, more digitally native standard of clarity. But that is a whole different layer of this ecosystem that we will have to leave for another time.
Down to where you choose to look for the truth of a business.
Indeed. Because at the end of the day, when you see a cracked facade on a new building, you have to decide for yourself. Is it just a bad paint job, or is the foundation really sinking?